I'm going to start us off right here.
Doesn't actually close it. Oh, okay. Yeah, it's actually stuck on the desk.
That's from the end of Moneyball, which is a really great movie among many excellent baseball movies, which is probably a point we might bring up. But I had a very good friend of mine in New York City when I lived there after college, Matthew Courtney. He ran a weekly open mic at ABC No Rio, which is, if you know the Lower East Side poetry scene, that was a big deal. And he was actually a flatmate of mine after that. And so we spent a lot of time together. And he had commented to me at one time after we had tried to embarrass ourselves and succeeded on the basketball courts at Tompkins Square Park, that baseball is the most literary of sports, the sport that gives itself most easily to literature. So this has kind of propelled me to this roundtable. Why is this? I think my brother, who is here with us today, once told me that it's probably because baseball moves so slow, it gives you time to actually write. He meant that in a pejorative sense. But maybe in so many of these silences between plays, I can imagine that I can actually hear the gears of decision and thought in the players and the managers moving, which pitch to throw, which pitch is the pitcher going to throw. As the inimitable Yogi Berra said, 90% of this game is half mental. Well, we have an incredible group of people to discuss this very question with us tonight. Michael Kleber-Diggs is a poet, essayist, and literary critic. His debut collection, Worldly Things, just out, by the way. In fact, I think you're still on your whirlwind publicity tour across continents. Won the Max Ritvo Poetry Prize and is available through Milkweed Editions, local publisher. Among others, Michael's writing has appeared or is forthcoming in Great River Review, Waterstone Review, Poem a Day, Poetry Daily, Poetry Northwest, Potomac Review, Hunger Mountain, Memorious, and a few anthologies. That's just a lot. Michael is a past fellow with the Gibbons Foundation for African American Literature, a past winner of the Loft Mentor Series of Poetry, and the former Poet Laureate of Anoka County Libraries. Julia Klatt SInger is a poet and painter. She is the poet in residence at Grace Neighborhood Nursery School. She is co-author of 12 Branches, Stories from St. Paul, which is on Coffee House Press. Author of In the Dreamed Places, which is on Nascence Press. A Tangled Path to Heaven, and Untranslatable, both on North Star Press, and Elemental on Prolific Press. Poems written to the periodic table. That is interesting. Audio poems from Elemental are at OpenKim, which is at openkim.org as The Element, SP. She's co-written numerous songs with composers Craig Carnahan and Jocelyn Hagan and Tim Takash. When not working, she can be found walking the dog. And Clarence White is a writer, editor, typewriter poet, curator, arts administrator, and former bookseller at Hungry Mind bookstores. His publications are included in several editions of the St. Paul Almanac. I think it's pronounced Suisun, Valley Review, and Public Art Review, and his essay, Smart Enough for Ford, appears in the anthology Blues Vision, African-American Writing from Minnesota, which is a book I actually had and should have pulled out before this, but he works in essay when he believes that conversation is possible, and in poetry when he is less hopeful. And I think you write more poetry, so I'm not sure what that says. Okay, never mind. He is the co-curator of the 2016-2017 Banfield Locks Reading Series and the Silverwood Parks 2014 Art on Hoof. He is a past Gibbons Foundation Retreat Fellow and was a finalist at menartist.org Flash Fiction Contest, Mini Stories. He lives in St. Paul. And Bill Meissner has been a lifelong baseball enthusiast and or player. He grew up in Iowa and Wisconsin and is the author of 10 books, including 2 baseball-themed books, Hitting into the Wind and Spirits in the Grass, a novel about a small-town ball player who discovers the remains of an ancient Native American burial site on a baseball field, or underneath a baseball field. for which he won the Midwest Book Award, along with his two latest baseball-themed collections, Light at the Edge of the Field, forthcoming from Stephen F. Austin University Press in September, and Circling Toward Home, Grassroots Baseball Photography and Prose, to be published in January 2022 by Finishing Line Press. His latest book of poetry is The Mapmaker's Dream from Finishing Line Press. And while there is much more, Bill is a Loft McKnight Award winner for both poetry and fiction, a Jerome winner of the Jerome Fellowship and Minnesota Arts Board Fellowship. His work has appeared in over 350 magazines in past years, and his photographs have appeared in several magazines. And he has written for Minnesota Twins magazine and done interviews with Nolan Ryan, Kirby Puckett, Ken Griffey Jr., Paul Molitor, Dave Winfield, and Don Mattingly. And I feel, given all of that, it might be best that I start with Bill. So I posit to you the question, why is this? Why is baseball, first off, is it the most literary, or the sport that gives itself most to literature and poetry? And if so, why?
Wonderful question, David. I wish I had the answer to that, but let me start with just saying
I asked you here, so you should have the answer. What do you mean?
I'm honored to be here with Michael, Julia, Clarence, and David. And I think I see Billy out there on the West Coast. Is that you? Over there somewhere? Okay. In the San Diego area. So yeah, I feel like baseball has its grace of motion and its elements of beauty, and it does have all those pauses within the game, which I think create anticipation. It also, baseball has, I'm sure others have said this too, but it has a parallel to the seasons, which I think is amazing and exciting. I mean, the first days of spring, early green grass, the game begins, it goes through the summer, and then October is the kind of the final hurrah of baseball, which, winter is about to happen. So it's kind of a symbol. Sometimes baseball is symbol for rebirth or regeneration for me. And also there's a lot of, other metaphor, a lot of baseball is metaphorical. I mean, we're safe or out, which means either things are good or bad, nothing in between. You're not in between anything. And also every motion is geared toward either keeping someone from home or getting to home to score a run. So home is sort of a central location for it. So yeah, I think that's some of it. I'm sure there's a lot more, and you four will be able to talk more about that too. I brought along one poem that was the first poem that I ever saw that was about baseball back in graduate school. So David, somebody else is coming on?
Yeah, I think there's no one else to admit in the waiting room, so I think we're good. I think everybody's here.
Okay. Yes, the first poem I ever saw that was about baseball, and actually I had never written even a word about it. I was MFA student working on serious poetry, personal stuff, but it really struck me. It's by a guy named Robert Francis, and it focuses on the base stealer, which is a pretty cool way to do it. And as I look back on it now, I see why I was captivated by it. So I'll read it. It's just about 10 lines or so, called The Base Stealer. Poised between going on and back, pulled both ways, taut like a tightrope walker, fingertips pointing the opposites, now bouncing tiptoe like a drop ball or a kid skipping rope, Come on, come on. Running a scattering of steps sideways. How he teeters, skitters, tingles, teases, taunts them, hovers like an ecstatic bird. He's only flirting. Crowd him, crowd him. Delicate, 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 delicate. Now. So the poem kind of catches you at the end. You can see this guy halfway between things and about to dash. And I like it because of the metaphors. A couple of my favorites. And baseball has lots of options for metaphors. He's poised both ways like a tightrope walker. He's bouncing on tiptoe like a drop ball or a kid skipping rope. And then he taunts them and hovers like an ecstatic bird. You can just picture this guy out on the base paths. And I do love those metaphors. I think that's it's quite amazing, even in this little tiny poem. And the other thing about baseball writing, at least that I try to do, is every poem that's about one thing is also about something else. So, and I think in this case, what struck me is it's about maybe being in between decisions, in between going one way or another. And that's
right.
message behind it, pulled both ways, taut like a tightrope walker, poised between going on and back. So it's got a really nice connection between someone going into the future or back to the past, or just being caught in the middle in a decision. So that's my little piece to start it out. If others have comments about that or other poems, go right ahead.
Well,
Go right ahead.
yeah. Well, here's I'll read like the first stanza of this poem by Marianne Moore called "Baseball and Writing." Fanaticism? No. Writing is exciting, and baseball is like writing. You can never tell with either how it will go or what you will do. Generating excitement, a fever in the victim, pitcher, catcher, fielder, batter. Victim in what category? All man watching from the press box? To whom does it apply? Who's excited? Might it be I? And it's like, people like to say baseball is life. And they could mean lots of different things by that. But one of the things about baseball is it is a good metaphor for life, in that even though it is not measured by time, it usually lasts about the same amount of time. Sometimes, though, it goes on forever, and sometimes it ends quickly, either through efficiency or because there was a storm and they got enough innings in to put it in the books. And it doesn't progress until something happens. And other sports, it whittles away just because the clock says so.
Right.
And life isn't really like that. And we might impose that on life, but baseball is different. But baseball is also this incredible metaphor, not for life really. I think it really is a Western thing, but it is a metaphor for America in this place we call America. One of my favorite books is David Halberstam's October 1964.
Oh gosh, okay.
Yeah, and Halberstam cut his teeth as a journalist covering the civil rights efforts in the 50s. And this book really reads with that kind of sensibility and awareness of the issue of race in America, but it also talks about our modern society and the post-war society and the mindset and expectations of people and players. He talks about players of this era expecting more. Prior to that, it's like, you're lucky to be here and you'll do what I say. But this is a post-war generation, and they expect a bonus. They expect to be able to buy the fancy car. They want nice clothes, and they expect to be treated differently.
Mhm.
and it really was a shift in America, a shift in attitudes and where America was and where it was going. And
Was 64
Halberstam
the
talked about
time when was 64 the time when Kurt Flood
so
refused to be traded?
this is before Kurt Flood challenged the reserve clause.
Okay.
It's a few years before that, but he is on this team, as are a lot of other what I would consider iconic players. But one of the things that Halberstam points out is the Cardinals manager. So it's the World Series between the St. Louis Cardinals and the New York Yankees. The Cardinals manager is a guy named Johnny Keane. And Johnny Keane was different in that, I mean, he had a different sensibility. He had studied to be a priest. He was going into the priesthood. So he had that kind of demeanor. And of course, he didn't become a priest, although it would be cool to have a priest as my manager. But but the way that he treated players really suited the time. So as opposed to shut up and do what I say, I'm the manager, it was more, who is this person I'm going to communicate with him.
Mm-hmm.
And so America had really changed in substantial ways. And a lot of people didn't realize that. And I remember when I was reading this book, it explained to me why George Herbert Walker Bush lost his second election. He had this idea, this phrase he used, kinder and gentler nation. What he didn't realize was that kinder and gentler nation had already happened a couple of decades before, and he had missed it, and he couldn't speak to the American people because the American people were already here, not in the generation that he grew up in and played baseball in, for that matter.
Yeah, and he was a baseball player too,
Right?
but quite a good one.
Yeah. So you know, but baseball explains that, especially I mean, post color line baseball. There are so many amazing stories, and there are so many stories worthy of civil rights attention, and the conversations and ideas about what especially the Black players had to go through. Another great book for that is David Moranis's biography on Roberto Clemente, talking about what the Latino and especially the Afro-Latino, the darker players went through, and you know, and like how America changed. So the St. Louis Cardinals were the first team. They bought a hotel because, you know, Kurt Flood said, hey, I can't stay in training camp like everyone else. We have to go find a house to live in with some family in town and take a long trip to the ballpark every day. And it's like, no, the team should stay together. And of course, it was against the law for them to stay together in Florida, in the South. The Black players and the white players couldn't be together.
Which I think is incredibly ironic because it was the St. Louis Cardinals in '47 who actually petitioned to leave baseball so that they didn't have to play the Brooklyn Dodgers.
Mm-hmm.
They did not have to play a Black player.
Yeah. And they were known as the team of the South. You know, the South didn't have any teams at that time.
Right.
They were they were known as the team of the South. So it is ironic, and that probably, you know, people talk about Jackie Robinson breaking the color line as being a seminal moment in Major League Baseball, but I really think Kurt Flood challenging the reserve clause is really the breakthrough moment that changed baseball and changed professional athletics. I mean, professional athletics was kind of amateur in its essence, given the kind of wealth that it was generating. But Kurt Flood challenged that and changed the way that baseball players were paid, but also made owners some of the richest people in America. There's so much more money there, and the quality of play is so much better.
I have a I have tons of baseball T-shirts, but one that I have, one of the oldest ones I have is a Homestead Grays T-shirt. It's not an official one of any kind. It says, you know, one of those property of kind of team T-shirts, property of Homestead Grays, which I always found was incredibly ironic because in the Negro Leagues, every player was a free agent. You signed a contract if you wanted to sign for more than a year, sure. But, you know, a lot of folks just sign year by year. And oftentimes, I mean, like Satchel Paige one time pitched the game for a Cleveland team while he was signed to the Pittsburgh team. He was allowed to do that because he wasn't pitching against Pittsburgh. It was money, you know, and so in the Negro Leagues, you weren't property of the team, but in the major leagues, because of the reserve clause, you were. You were literally property of the team to be disposed of the way the team would want to do that.
The one other thing I would mention about Halberstam's book is that the big difference between the Cardinals and the Yankees was the Cardinals were fairly well integrated. The Yankees had one black player, Elston Howard, but the Cardinals had a lot of black players. You know, Bill White, Lou Brock, Kurt Flood,
Bob Gibson,
and a couple of other folks, but it sort of was a sort of a triumph of, you know, this idea of diversity, which probably wasn't the language at the time, but he really illustrates that. And Halberstam writes very well. And you know, we talk about why does baseball lend itself to literature so much? The stories are just better. I mean, I haven't read many stories about other sports that are really that good. The stories are just so good. The people and the games. So.
Okay, so taking from that, because there's a lot of other places. I mean, Halberstam wrote Boys of Summer, right? So that, and for those who don't know, that's the story of the Brooklyn Dodgers with Jackie Robinson and how for 1 year they beat the New York Yankees. And the Yankees generally only had one black player because their general manager was like, there's no way any black player is going to play with the Yankees. So, and of course, Branch Rickey just totally jumped on it as soon as Kennesaw Mountain Landis was dead. And that was the end of the gentleman's agreement. The gentleman's agreement was something that started around 18 something. That basically said, hey, we're okay with players of color so long as they're Mexican or Hispanic or Native American, no blacks. So that was the gentleman's agreement. Ran up until 1947 when Kennesaw Mountain Landis died, and Branch Rickey totally jumped on that and hired Jackie Robinson to begin with and just totally went off on it. Cleveland Indians were the next club that did that. Gosh, I then got way off. Oh, yeah, so on to the idea that you left off with, Clarence, the stories. You know, why are the stories more interesting in baseball? What about baseball lends itself to more interesting stories, like, you know, stories where you see a character arc go through like a game or a career or...
I want to defer to Julia, but I'm I'll also jump in. I don't know. Julia, do you have a thought on it?
Well, I think there's something about the framework of baseball, those 9 innings that feel like, at least to me, like chapters, and that each one has those equal parts of you get up to bat, you have 3 strikes, you have 3 outs, that there's sort of this framework that's built in baseball, but it never goes as planned. There's always foul balls, there's the balls and the foul ones that kind of keep the rhythm off. So we don't know what's going to happen. So I think even just how it's built as a game lends for movement and story and arc that, like poetry too, that we kind of love all those patterns, but then we love when they go off too. And we don't know where they're going. We don't know in the end who is going to get that final hit, who's going to be on top.
I was going to add that, poetry is built of basic tools in many respects. It's sound, it's meter, it's stanza and form and things like that. And I think this can be said of many sports, but, we talk often of the 5-tool player. And when we do that, you can kind of break down, it's just hitting, throwing, catching, and running. You add hit for power, but that's just an expansion of another concept. And I think it's, yes, okay, so throwing the ball, but then there are so many ways to do that. As an outfielder, you throw in a particular way. As an infielder, you throw in a particular way. And as a pitcher, you throw in several particular ways. But I think that those foundational things kind of lend themselves also to thinking about craft in a way. And then the last thing for me, I wish I could remember specifically, but there's this really spectacular radio episode about soccer goalies and about how that's among the loneliest jobs in sport.
Yeah.
And there are opportunities to be a hero there, but your best chance for notoriety is when you get it wrong. One of the things that struck me about baseball, playing it growing up, is more than any other sport I can think of, it's a team sport and it isn't. For sure. Now, this is, by the way, I was a catcher for many years. When I got to high school as a freshman, the sophomore catcher on our team was one of the best in the state. So I knew that job was taken for 3 years. But infielders, that's a real team sport. There's no question about it. But there are several moments where it's just you. You are at the plate. You are on the mound. You are in the field and it's coming your way. What happens is it's down to you. And of course, you're part of a unit. And there's no question about that. But there are so many times in that when you're on your own. And I think that, kind of getting back to what Julia shared, it really amplifies characters in that way. The other sport I played, football, is a true team sport. You can do some things on your own to affect the game, but really, someone's blocking for you. Someone's, staying home, or someone's covering the zone, or something's happening. It's almost always 3 or 4 people affecting an outcome. But in baseball, it's just you.
I think what's very interesting about baseball, and I would actually harken back to there's an incredible bit that George Carlin did on baseball versus football. And it's one of only 2 comedy bits enshrined in the Baseball Hall of Fame. And of course, the other one is Who's on First. But the incredible, one of the things that he cites in is that football is an industrial technological struggle. And part of what he means by that is that, everybody, there's a division of labor. So it's just like an advanced economic engine. So everybody knows what they're going to do, and that's what they got to do. And there are going to be some people who are in the 1%, like the quarterback and the running back, and there's going to be a lot of grunts that nobody ever knows. And in baseball, everyone's isolated. You know, there's the pitcher and the batter, so it's isolated on the pitcher delivering the pitch, then the batter hitting it, and then maybe it goes to third base, and now we're isolated on the third baseman. And, you know, maybe it's a double play situation, so now we get isolated on, you know, the transference of that ball, the second baseman or the shortstop, and then how that gets over to the first baseman, but everyone is isolated. And I think that also allows for everyone to have their own way of doing it. Because there is always, wow, this is the guy who plays it this way. Nobody else does it that way, but hey, he makes it work. And I think from that might be where we start with character arc and stuff. I mean, we can build a character arc out of that. We watch Peyton Manning throw a ball or one of his blockers block. Where's the character arc?
Yeah, I wanted to jump in just for a minute to talk about, or to at least compliment Michael on being a catcher. So I think that's the only position I could play, honestly, in any little league, amateur, or anything, was the outfield. Mainly because I was petrified of ground balls after having about 10 of them come toward, you know, the coach put me in infield just for a moment. And it didn't matter where I was on that infield, the ball, when it was about 2 or 3 feet in front of me, would suddenly jump and try to hit me in the face. At least that's the way I treated it. But so I said, no, get me in the outfield. I need to be in the outfield. But he's right. It's very isolated out there. And when you're, let's say, center field, you have about 6 seconds, unlike a quick ground ball where it happens, it's done. You got about 6 seconds where everybody's watching you either lope under it, misjudge it, go too far forward instead of backward, you know, and then either you catch it or you're. And then the throwback too, I always consider that sort of metaphorical. It's an outfielder's point of connection is from out there back to second, back to home. And that's the only way it connects with the other fielders while he's out there. Mm-hmm. So, and Michael, just so you know, I have caught once, which once it was just in a pickup game kind of thing. So I was basically pitching the foul tips, trying to catch the ball coming in, catch one in the dirt, and then you don't catch it in the dirt. Yeah. So anyway, that's my little take on outfielding. But I do love that. I have no more fun than having somebody in pickup ball just hit some fly balls to you. Yeah. You know, when it's not a game and you're just out there for fun and catch it or don't catch it, dive for it, miss it or don't, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I'll just say that when you're 12, 13, 14 playing catcher, everybody who gets on first is going to try to take second. It's just it's so hard at that age to throw it with pace and accuracy. You're going to get.
When I coached Little League, they didn't even allow stealing. So,
wow, yeah.
But it's interesting though. We're talking about sort of this solitude and individuality. But at the same time, all those other sports, conceivably, someone could almost do everything themselves. But there's nothing in baseball, almost nothing that you could do yourself. I mean, if you're an outfielder, there is that solitude, but you can't do anything until you have to throw the ball back in. You know,
and it's got to go to you then.
Going on. Or if you're a shortstop, I mean, you could get a pop-up or something, but you still got to throw it to somebody else. You can't just do it all yourself, unless you're Satchel Paige, I think.
Clarence, didn't we all play that game in our backyard where we were the pitcher and the runner and the outfielder, and we move through?
Oh, right.
Right? We knew every piece of that pitch and hit, and so you jump around and play the different parts.
Is
Yeah.
that, did you have a ghost runner then? That was the idea? Yeah.
That's where the Grand Slams came from. But but it's like there is this, it's like it is individual, and maybe that's the American fallacy, but it's collective. But there is this way that you can just hone in on one thing. I mean, I think of Bill, your piece about Kirby Puckett's legs, and there's a reason for making it, sort of this singular, isolated thing, because there's beauty in that. And I think baseball photography books are just so amazing. The lines that get created in baseball, whether it's on one individual player or a tandem or a collection of players or even the whole field, it is so incredibly beautiful in ways that you just rarely see in other sports, even in basketball, where the players do amazing things. I mean, they do these incredibly conspicuous, wonderful acrobatic things. The photography and the art isn't that great. But in baseball, the composition is already there, and it's amazing. But
So on that point, so I made the graphic for this, and that's Ted Williams swinging. And I was first looking for is a good graphic of Satchel Paige's windup. And one of the things that's a problem is when there's a lot of difference in color or gradations, it doesn't work very well for, being able to put typeface over. And that one of Ted Williams, there was such, a stark black and white that I could work with. But there is such like an elegance to an iconic elegance to like Satchel Paige, to Sandy Koufax's windup, just stretched out over the mound, getting ready to deliver the curveball. I don't know why that is with baseball as opposed to other sports in general. It doesn't seem like there's any reason why no other sports could have that.
Well, I think Michael said it really well, that idea of the individual in baseball. We can see them all on the field. They all stand in their spots, yet it's a collection too, and a collective experience for that team. And just like a poem typically has a really strong voice to it, yet there's that universal that it moves to also, that sort of team feel that is part of a poem. It gets bigger than the individual, but we get to see the individual. We get to see what they do or don't do, how well they can do it.
But then you get to see them work with other people. I mean, I think one thing is teams take on an identity. Good teams take on an identity, it seems.
And a quick footnote on Ted Williams. And this is part of back to what we're talking about, the democratic element of baseball, and maybe the fairness that everybody gets a chance. You're out, you're safe, your individual performance counts. But isn't Ted the guy who said it's the only sport, major league or professional sport I know of where you can fail 2 times out of 3 and they still consider you a great hitter? Because you're batting 330. But I think that's part of the uniqueness of it. You don't have to be great. You can be, you can be good 1 time out of 3 and people will say, wow, that person's a good hitter. They did really well. Great career. But yet there's a lot of failure within that, within that frame.
I had a whole thing
Oh, that-
Totally set me up perfectly.
okay, there you go.
On also failure in baseball. And since we were talking about character and character arc, maybe that's one, because, failure is just integral to baseball. I mean, you take a look at our most revered fandoms, like the Red Sox and the Cubs, because, they failed for so long. And you're right, like a 300 hitter, that's great. That's less than 2 out of 3 times batting
Right.
300. So,
Well, the Dodgers had a history of failure too, that
right.
a whole community got behind.
Yeah, they were called Bim Bombs.
The Bums.
That's exactly what I was thinking. I mean, to be in New York and not win the World Series year after year. And I even think of like the 1951 season and that the playoff that they had with the Giants.
Right. Bobby Thompson. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like is etched in my mind is, I mean, of course I wasn't there. I wasn't born yet. I'm not quite that old, but is etched in my mind is, the Giants won the pennant is also the scene, the picture taken from the outfield with Jackie Robinson with his hands on his hips, watching Thompson round the bases. And also Ralph Branca walking off.
I felt so bad for Branca.
And it's like, that is so powerful. And there's a kind of grace in that. I mean, and the whole season is an amazing story, but there's so many stories in that moment. I mean, there's a story in that, and Jules Teal talks about this, but the Giants didn't have their best team on the field. Ray Dandridge was in Minneapolis, but there was a quota. You could only have, I think, 5 black players up at a time.
Oh, really? Okay.
The color line was broken, but you couldn't have your best players on the field. It wasn't until the 70s that you could really do that.
Huh. No.
And also, people look at that picture, Jackie Robinson standing out in the middle of the field. Everyone else is walking off the field, or at least the Dodger players are off the field. The Giants players are celebrating. They're going wild as 2/3 of the people in the Polo Grounds. But Robinson is there, and it's like, he's very competitive. And he's not sulking. He's not upset. What he's doing is he's watching to make sure that Thompson touches all the bases. Because if he misses a base, that's their last hope. If he misses a base and he's still on the field, the game isn't over. If he leaves the field, as soon as all of the Dodgers leave the field, the game is over. That's the rule. There's this one last opportunity, and
he's waiting for a Merkel boner kind of situation.
Yeah, and as long as he's on the field, the game's still on, and they can do something. But
wow.
And the other thing that people don't really talk about is Thompson hit a weak fly ball. He hit a weak fly ball, and because of the dimensions of the Polo Grounds, it went out of the park. In most parks, that might have gone foul, or it's a ball that someone runs over and catches for the out, and but still, it's like, all because of that, all of these guys wearing Dodger blue are sad. And that, and the other part there is like, Ralph Branca was probably the worst pitcher to bring in at that moment, because he hadn't given up many home runs that year, but the ones that he'd given up were to the Giants, and 2 of them were to Bobby Thompson. So, and that's a bigger story. That's as big of a story as the Giants coming from like how many games behind
Right.
So
That also brings up a thing that's weird about baseball is that the field dimensions are changed for every place you play. Which, you know, imagine if you're playing football and it's like, yeah, well, it's only 90 yards on the left side to the touchdown.
baseball is asymmetrical, even in
Right.
symmetrical parks. And the left-handers can't play the infield except for first base.
Yes.
And there's almost never a left-handed catcher.
There have been left-handed catchers. I dispute that. But they've been problematic.
Just
But there have been.
there have been what?
Left-handed catchers.
Just a couple, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Well, at this point, I wonder if we want to take a short break and then come back and really dig into some poetry about baseball. Does that sound good for everybody?
Sounds great.
Okay, let's think about like, you know, 3 minutes. I've done 5 minutes in the past and it seems to drag. So we'll do 3 and come on back.